It's sometimes easy to know what Donald Trump thinks about various issues. That's when he's been saying essentially the same thing for decades, long before he ever entered politics. But on many issues, it's quite difficult to understand what it is that he does believe, what it is that he will come to believe, often because he has different conflicting instincts on certain issues, and oftentimes it's a question of who angers him most or who influences him most, and it can be very difficult to predict. But one thing I think we can say for certain is that Trump really genuinely believes that he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize and is actively campaigning for it. He's repeatedly pointed out that he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. He always adds, of course, I'm not going to get it, but clearly he's hoping he will. And I have to say, as far as instinct for a president or an ambition for a president is concerned, there are a lot worse ones than wanting the Nobel Peace Prize, because he obviously knows that in order to win the Nobel Peace Prize, he needs to show that he has successfully resolved wars. Now, the two by far largest wars which have been raging over the last several years, including from the very first day that he assumed the presidency for the second time, is the war in Ukraine with Russia and NATO, which he has definitely tried but has been unsuccessful in resolving. He seems now to want to put pressure on Russia by feeding Ukraine even more amounts of intelligence and weapons, although at the same time cutting off the supply of money. And clearly he's trying to pressure each side to try and bring an end to that war, which he finds irritating and annoying at best, and wants the United States out of it, but hasn't been able to. And then the other biggest war, the one that has actually captured more of the world's attention because of the extreme atrocities committed, is the Israeli war in Gaza, which the United States from the start has financed, funded, armed, diplomatically and militarily supported, protected, and enabled, first under Joe Biden and then under Donald Trump. And Trump obviously knows that a Nobel Peace Prize or any chance for it would be impossible if the United States is continuing to arm and fund Israel in what the United Nations and multiple human rights groups and all sorts of scholars of genocide, including Israeli ones, have concluded is a genocide. You don't win the Nobel Peace Prize by arming, funding, cheering, protecting, and fighting to protect a genocide. Trump knows that, even if he doesn't consider it a genocide, and he has made it an obvious priority to try and end that war. Remember, before he even was inaugurated, the day before he was inaugurated, he sent Steve Witkoff to the Middle East, and Steve Witkoff, by all accounts, is very aggressive in demanding the Israelis and the Palestinians agree to a ceasefire, the first real ceasefire of a sustained duration since that war began, exactly 2 years ago tomorrow. And the problem with it was that Benjamin Netanyahu was under a lot of pressure from his right wing, and he was promising, basically from the start, look, don't worry, Trump promised me he just wants a ceasefire to come into office undistracted. He wants it for his inauguration, maybe for a few weeks, but we'll get right back to bombing the Gazans, and that's exactly what they did. The ceasefire happened, a few exchange of prisoners, and then Netanyahu made good on his promise that he made in the Israeli press to just go right back to killing the Gazans. In fact, they escalated their use of force under Trump, killed huge numbers of more people, engaged in far more reckless and destructive behavior than even before, and before it was bad enough. So Trump clearly wants to end this war, and he last week unveiled what he called a 20-point plan that he said he had negotiated with the leaders of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Jordan, and Turkey. And those governments also came out and said that they were participants in the negotiation of this deal and favored it as well. And Hamas basically issued a statement saying that they accept the terms, although made reservations to refused to comply with some of the more extreme ones. And then the Israelis did exactly the same thing. Netanyahu said, we agree to these terms, but made statements making clear that they don't agree to all of them. And now there's a negotiation underway to see whether or not this deal can actually make it across the finish line. For obvious reasons, it's a very complex and difficult task to end this war in a meaningful way, not just end it for a little while there's an exchange of hostages and then go back to it. And this is what Donald Trump is doing. So here from the Wall Street Journal, this is from last week, September 30th, Trump gives Hamas an ultimatum to release the hostages or face destruction by Israel. Quote, for months, President Trump warned Hamas that it had to release all remaining hostages or face Israel's wrath. On Monday, he issued an ominous message. Agree to a 20-point peace plan for Gaza or suffer complete annihilation. In effect, Trump threatened the prospect of more war in order to end nearly 2 years of fighting. If Hamas doesn't accept, or the plan falls apart, quote, Israel would have my full backing to finish the job of destroying the threat of Hamas, Trump said. Now, I'm not really sure what's new about this. Trump has repeatedly threatened that many times. The Israelis clearly have had the full support of Donald Trump and Marco Rubio and everyone else in the administration to destroy Gaza, the people of Gaza, the infrastructure of Gaza without any limits. But Trump has escalated his rhetoric on several occasions to threaten, quote unquote, annihilation, meaning annihilation is exactly what it sounds like. He would say annihilate Hamas, but in order to annihilate Hamas, you'd have to annihilate the people of Gaza, even more so than they've already been doing. Whether that's really what Trump intends to do or whether that's him putting pressure on Hamas remains to be seen. But I certainly believe that if this deal doesn't go through, regardless of who's to blame, Trump will blame Hamas. The Israelis will get him to blame Hamas. His advisors loyal to Israel will get him to blame Hamas. And this war will actually escalate. Here from the Washington Post more recently, this is October 6th, this is today, Gaza ceasefire talks to begin in Egypt as Israel strikes the enclave. And ever since Trump announced his peace plan, he tweeted or put on Truth Social, he said, Israel is to stop the bombing. That was the instruction that, as President of the United States, he very publicly issued to Israel. And of course, Israel is a vassal state. We pay for their arms and finance their war, so Trump has every right to say it. Here he is on October 3rd. We can put that back up there, the post itself, where he gave these instructions. He said, based on the statement just issued by Hamas, which is the one I referred to earlier, where they at least signaled agreement in concept, he said, I believe they are ready for a lasting peace. As a result, Israel must immediately stop the bombing of Gaza so that we can get the hostages out safely and quickly. Right now, it's far too dangerous to do that. We are already in discussions on details to be worked out. This is not about Gaza alone. This is about long-sought peace in the Middle East. Now, despite telling Israel, or telling the world, quote, Israel must immediately stop the bombing of Gaza, Israel ignored that, has done nothing of the kind, has killed over 150 people, at least, since then, including scores of children, as usual, just trying to annihilate as many lives in Gaza as they can out of fear that this might actually come to an end. And Trump hasn't really objected at all. But in any event, this is what they are now trying to do to actually get this over the finish line. They're heading to Israel. And the article reads, quote, Israel and Hamas officials were sent to gather Monday in Egypt for high-stakes negotiations over a U.S.-backed plan to end the Gaza war, even as Israel continued to pummel the enclave with air and artillery strikes that, per Gaza Health Ministry data, continued to kill Palestinians at the same rate as before Hamas conditionally accepted the deal Friday. Negotiations to end the two-year-long war were revived last month after Israel launched airstrikes targeting Hamas's political leadership in the Qatari capital, Doha. Senior Hamas officials emerged from the attack unscathed, but Qatar and their Persian Gulf neighbors, outraged by the operation, leveraged their ties to Donald Trump to push for a ceasefire agreement that was acceptable to Arab states. Khalil al-Hayya, the negotiating lead for Hamas, who survived the Israeli assassination attempt last month, arrived in Egypt on Sunday to head its delegation. In turn, Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey pressured Hamas to respond positively to the 20-point plan that Trump unveiled a week after meeting with Arab and Islamic leaders at the UN. Still, Hamas wants to see a clear timeline for Israel's withdrawal, according to a former Egyptian official familiar with the negotiations. The group fears that once it hands over the remaining hostages, quote, the Israelis will say they will not leave, the former official said. Hamas also wants a guarantee from the United States that Israel will not resume its attacks in Gaza after the hostages are freed. Now, to me, this is by far the biggest problem with the deal. And a lot of this is the fault of the United States and Donald Trump. Remember, Trump and Netanyahu basically imposed on the world through the media, through particularly one journalist in particular, the Israeli journalist for Axios, Barak Ravid. The Biden administration used him for the same way. He's just a pure stenographer of the court. He writes down what they tell him. And for months, he was writing down that there was a huge rift between Trump and Netanyahu. Netanyahu wanted to bomb Iran. Trump was telling him he couldn't. And Trump was instead negotiating with Iran, was almost certain that he was going to get a deal. He was saying this up until the day or two before he and the Israelis launched an attack on Iran. And the Iranians concluded, obviously, the only thing you could conclude was that the whole thing was a ruse. There were no real negotiations. It was pretend negotiations to try and get Iran to sort of have their guard down in order to let Israel attack without much preparation, without much defense, heightened defense. And in a lot of ways that's happened. Not only did Israel do that, right as Trump was saying, we're still negotiating, we're close to a deal, I think we're going to get a deal, there's no bombing need necessary. But also, the first thing the Israeli did is killed the negotiators for Iran, the people negotiating with the United States through intermediaries. And a lot of the world looked at that and said, why would I ever believe the United States when they say they want a deal on behalf of Israel when they work hand in hand with Israel, even when they're pretending publicly they don't want that? And this is the same thing that's happening now. Trump and his White House officials have leaked to the same Israeli journalist, who used to be in the IDF, of course, Barak Ravid. And you say he used to be in the IDF reserves until 2023, just very recently. And they released to him that, here you see the headline, Trump to Netanyahu on Gaza talks, you're always so effing negative. Again, trying to create this perception that Trump and Netanyahu are at loggerheads, that Trump has had enough of Netanyahu, that he's forcing this deal down his throat, despite Netanyahu's opposition. There were leaks from the same reporter saying that Netanyahu and his officials were surprised by Trump's announcement. So again, they're trying to create this perception that Trump and Netanyahu aren't on the same page, that Trump is trying to force Netanyahu into a deal that he doesn't really want. And so obviously, if you're Hamas, if you're the Gazans, if you're people negotiating on behalf of the Gazans, of course you're going to be extremely skeptical that if you give back the hostages, anything that you're promised is actually going to happen. If I were Hamas, my assumption would be that if I gave back the hostages, then Netanyahu would concoct some reason why we didn't adhere to the deal, why we violated it, and why they're not only justified but obligated to go and now bomb us even more and finish the job. And it seems like that's at least what Netanyahu is telling his far-right flank in the Israeli press that they intend to do. And so there are a lot of reasons to be extremely dubious about all of this. But I have to say, in Trump's defense, that would be the case no matter what this deal was like. You're talking here about two sides that absolutely despise each other. One, not just for 2 years, but for many decades, it's always extremely difficult to end a war that way. And there have been people who tried to forge peace deals over the many decades between Israel and the Palestinians, of course, and none of those have really come to fruition. So if Trump is actually able to end this war in a way that is enduring, meaning the Israelis don't go right back in as soon as they get back their hostages and start bombing, if they actually withdraw from Gaza in the way that the peace plan envisioned, I do think Trump will deserve credit for that, notwithstanding the huge mar on his record, not just as a president, but as a human being, for having financed this genocide for so long. And they're trying to also create the perception that this time Trump is genuinely angry at Netanyahu. They released a photo where Trump forced Netanyahu to call up the Qataris and apologize to the Qataris for having bombed their country with no notice, with no consent of any kind. And they released a picture, the White House did, of Trump holding the phone next to Netanyahu. While Netanyahu had the phone in his hand, he was reading off a piece of paper that was his apology to the Qataris. And I do think this is actually a genuine factor in what's happening here that makes this something other than just a full ruse. I talked about this last week, that obviously Trump is completely captive to and beholden to and loyal to the Israelis. He all but has said that, including during the campaign when he promised to make Israel great again, when he talked about how the Adelsons came to the White House more than anybody in the first term, always demanding things for Israel, and Trump always gave it to them, and how he intends to do that again, how he wants to be the most pro-Israel president in history. So that is genuine, obviously. Trump loves the Israelis. He views it as politically in his interest. By all accounts, his favorite child is Ivanka Trump, who herself is now Jewish. She converted when she married Jared Kushner. So he not only has a Jewish daughter, but Jewish children. And Jared Kushner is not just Jewish, but he's Orthodox Jew and not only supportive of Israel, but the most radical factions in Israel, including the settlement movement that wants to steal the West Bank from the Palestinians. So Trump is surrounded by this, not just politically but and financially, but personally. That is very real. But what's also very real is that Trump loves the Persian Gulf dictatorships, loves them, loves Saudi Arabia, loves the Emiratis, and loves the Qataris. And that too is very genuine. And part of the reason it's genuine is because he sees those places as the model for what, maybe not just the Middle East, but certainly the Middle East, but maybe large parts of the world should be, which is a U.S. captive or at least pro-U.S. dictatorship that keeps the population and its views and beliefs and desires completely repressed under an iron fist. No elections, no anything like that, just transfer of power through monarchical faction, dictatorial faction. He loves the king of Jordan, loves the dictator in Egypt. And on top of that, these countries are obscenely wealthy. They're just flooded with money. And they have used a lot of that money to personally enrich Donald Trump's associates, his friends, his family. It is not a conspiracy theory. This is something that's well documented. Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump and the Trump Organization and Jared Kushner all have billions of dollars worth of business in Qatar and the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. And of course, the Qataris just gifted Trump a $400 million airplane because Trump doesn't like Air Force One because it's old, 40 years old, and he wants something far more elaborate. And just, I think, aesthetically, if you can picture Trump, you know, the aesthetic of Dubai and Doha and Riyadh is this very ostentatious display of wealth, you know, very high ceilings, everything gold and marble, just like the finest materials from all over the world, just very, you know, brazen displays of wealth, which is Trump's aesthetic too. I don't think that's controversial to say. I think it's suffice to say that Trump is far more comfortable in, say, Doha or in Dubai than he is in Jerusalem. So he does have a genuine affection for these countries. He has a genuine belief that it's in the interest of himself and his family in the United States to maintain very positive relations. And this is the one thing I do believe, is that Trump was genuinely angry when Netanyahu bombed Qatar. Because Qatar is a country Trump cares about. And I think the Qataris felt like, look, everything we do, same with Saudi Arabia, same with the Emiratis, is based on our belief, our understanding that the guarantor of our security is the United States. We do a lot for the United States. We do a lot for you, Donald Trump, and your family, because our understanding is you're going to protect us. And here you have your closest ally using your weapons that you give them and that you pay for, bombing our country. Right in the middle of Doha. And I do think Trump was genuine anger about that. I don't think that was a ruse. And I think that became potentially a mistake that Netanyahu made, especially because they didn't even kill the leadership of Hamas as they were trying. That made Trump, A, kind of get to the point of being fed up with this war and just determined to shove a ending down the throat of all the parties. But B, genuine anger with Netanyahu for bombing his friends. And I think that was the opportunity. Now, just one last thing that I think has been so often misunderstood is that the reason Hamas officials are in Qatar is because the United States and Israel always have wanted Qatar, the leaders of Hamas in Qatar. That's how they negotiate with Hamas when they need to, through the Qataris. This is going back to the Obama administration and even earlier. It's not like Qatar just decided on their own to have Hamas there. There's a gigantic U.S. military base in the middle of Doha. If you go to Doha, you will see as many U.S. generals and military officials and officers as you see Qataris, for sure. Way more, in fact. There aren't that many Qataris. There are a lot of foreign slave labor in Qatar. You see those too. But what you principally see are just U.S. military officials everywhere because there's the biggest military base in the region. It's an important place for the United States. And the fact that Israel bombed Qatar is something that I think genuinely offended Trump. And then Trump said, all right, enough. Now, again, whether Israel is actually going to be dictated to by Trump or whether Israel will find ways around this, will find ways to manipulate Trump to provoke Hamas or pretend that they provoked Hamas into violating the deal remains to be seen. But one thing is for certain. Here's Haaretz. Over the weekend, yesterday, Gaza officials report 63 deaths in the past day, despite Israel's announced pause in the offensive operations. The Gaza Health Ministry said on Sunday that 63 Palestinians were killed and 153 wounded in the past 24 hours, despite Israel announcing a pause in offensive operations. And you don't have to just take their word for it. You see videos of it. You see reporting about it and from people in Gaza with videos, with documentation, foreign aid workers, foreign medical workers, Western healthcare workers, all documenting the same thing. So Israel is hardly a country. Netanyahu is hardly a government that's just going to immediately do whatever Trump tells them to do. They're going to pretend to. They can't just admit that they're ignoring Trump's directives, but they're going to try and find ways around it. Now, it's interesting what Trump has been what Trump has been posting about this. Here's from his Truth Social account on October 3rd. October 4th, he posted this picture, which is a protest in Israel led by the hostages' families who have long been angry with Netanyahu and believe that Netanyahu deprioritized the fate of the hostages in order to keep this war prolonged for his own personal interests. And this is a large protest of Israelis demanding an end to the war. And you see the sign there, it's now or never, with a yellow ribbon, which signifies the Israeli hostages in Gaza. And Trump himself posted that to his account. And I think he's saying here, trying to put pressure on Netanyahu and saying, look, this is an anti-Netanyahu protest. They're pro-Trump. They want an end to this war. I want an end to this war. And so I absolutely believe that Trump wants an end to this war, even if it's for his own personal reasons. And again, I don't really care what motivates Trump to want an end to this war. And obviously, I put a lot of blame on Trump, as I said, for the continuation of this war for 10 months, for its escalation, for the horrors that it entailed. But anyone who pretends to oppose what Israel is doing or to care about the Palestinian cause and the Palestinians themselves and U.S. policy toward Israel should want an end to this war, no matter what motivates it. Here was Trump yesterday, also on Truth Social, clearly trying to generate momentum for it. And he wrote this, quote, "There have been very positive discussions with Hamas and countries from all over the world, Arab, Muslim, and everyone else this weekend to release the hostages and end the war in Gaza, but more importantly, finally have long-sought peace in the Middle East. These talks have been very successful and are proceeding rapidly. The technical teams will again meet Monday in Egypt to work through and clarify the final details. I am told the first phase should be completed this week, and I am asking everyone to move fast. I will continue to monitor this centuries-old conflict. Time is of the essence, or massive bloodshed will follow, something that nobody wants to see." Now, obviously, that's not true. It's not true that nobody wants to see massive bloodshed. There are huge amounts of people in Israel, including the worst elements in the Israeli government, and the millions of people in Israel who support them and follow them, who want to see ongoing bloodshed. They don't want an end to this war in a way that allows the Palestinians to maintain any kind of autonomy or agency in Gaza. They've been very upfront that they want to cleanse the Palestinians, to cleanse Gaza, the Palestinians, and take over Israel. But I think that Trump here is, and again, you see him both when he announced the deal and in the one yesterday where he tried to suggest it's moving forward and wants to see it move forward. He's talking about a broader peace in the Middle East. That's what he wants his legacy to be. And he thinks that not just because he'll get credit for bringing an end to the war in Gaza, but he's also concerned, as I think are the Qataris and the Saudis and the Emiratis, that this war really can spill over into their own countries, as evidenced by the fact that Israel just bombed Qatar. And then also you even saw a week or two ago that when asked in the Oval Office about the annexation of the West Bank by Israel, Trump said, he didn't just say, I'm not in favor of that. He said, I'm not going to let them annex the West Bank. And in part, that's because those three countries, the Saudis, the Qataris, and the Emiratis, have said any annexation of the West Bank by Israel would immediately not just destroy any attempts to have better relations, but would cause us to abandon the progress we made, including the Abraham Accords. Trump doesn't want an abandonment of the Abraham Accords. He wants a significant expansion of it. Trump in the Middle East wants his legacy to be that he's gotten these countries that he loves, the ones he thinks are the good ones, to normalize relations with Israel, to isolate Iran, probably bring about regime change in Iran, turn Iran into a country like these others, There's been reporting of, totally unsurprising, that the Israelis are financing and funding internal dissent in Iran to try and bring back the Shah of Iran, which was the U.S. puppet for decades, that did the bidding of Israel and the United States, that made Iran a pro-Western outlet, gave access to their oil. And of course, that's what many in the West want, especially Israel supporters in the West want, is a return of that monarchy, the Shah's son, who very much wants to rule Iran despite not having lived there for decades. That's Trump's vision. I don't think it's a good vision. I think it's a repressive vision, in fact. But if the result in the interim is actually ending the war in Gaza, ending the slaughter and the killing and destruction and genocide, I don't think I should be the one to decide whether that's worth it. I think the Palestinians should be the ones to decide that, but they seem, all Palestinians do for understandable reasons, to want an end to the war, provided it doesn't mean a complete relinquishment of their autonomy. They don't want an end to the war if it means having to leave or turning control over to Israelis or some puppet regime. And a lot of this is very much in flux. That's what happened after the deal was announced, was the Arab countries signed onto a deal, and then Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner met with Netanyahu for hours, and the deal that emerged was actually different in substantial form than the one to which these Arab countries agreed, making a lot of these clauses much more pro-Israel than the ones to which those countries had agreed. There's going to be a lot of back and forth, a lot of push and pull. This is not going to end easily. But if it ends and the Gazans have time to breathe and to get true humanitarian aid in there and try to return to some semblance of an ordinary life, provided they are content with the price that they're paying, with the things they're giving up, with the things to which they're agreeing. I think anyone in the world who's been watching this with so much horror and so much anger that the United States is supporting it and funding it would have to consider the end of all this to be on par a positive development, but by no means is this a done deal. And I could easily see the Israelis concocting all sorts of reasons to continue to bomb the Gazans. They've done that with Lebanon after the ceasefire. They just do whatever they want in the West Bank. And nobody should trust the Israelis as far as they can throw them. So a lot of this still remains to be seen, but it's worth talking about only because of the potential to end this genocide finally. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.